Welcome to the Live Fire Show. My name is Mike Seeklander, and I appreciate you watching. We have a great show for you today. We actually have a featured company, and then we have my buddy Tim Herron that we're going to bring on, and we're going to talk about transition. So if you're watching this, of course, get ready to rock and roll, because we're going to be talking about one of the key items that you need to master if you want to be a better competitive shooter or any kind of shooter. It doesn't matter if you're a defensive shooter, a tactical shooter, competition shooter. This particular subject is going to be very, very interesting. Of course, if you're some of our Live Fire members, welcome Live Fire members if you're watching this right now. By the way, if you are on Live Fire and you haven't given me a follow or sent me a message, please do so I can follow you back. If you're not on Live Fire, you should be on Live Fire. Eventually on the show, you're going to see a little QR code float by or a URL. You can click that URL or use that QR code and get on Live Fire. We'd love to see you on. It's got some great content. And speaking of great content, let's talk about weekly programming. As you know, we do weekly programming each and every week. And the last one we did was actually Point Flash Focus 2. So we're actually working on those different methods of aiming the handgun at speed, and we're adding the draw. And I think next week I have the good old school bill drill coming up. And a tip for you, when we talk about drill versus skills test, understand that the same drill can also be a skills test if you're measuring, what you're trying to do in that shooting sequence. So pay attention to that. If you're not on Live Fire, once again, you should check it out. If you're one of my coin members, I'd love for you to type your coin number in the comments. Welcome, coin members, as well as my other members, the competitive members as well. So welcome to the show. Don't forget, you can always add a question in the comments there. If I don't address in this particular show, I'll shout back out at you next week, and we'll get your questions answered. Before we get into the show, safety is always a big deal. We got to talk about safety. So please, if you're going to be handling a firearm, maybe you want to work some transitions with Tim and I while we're doing the show, safety is the key. So if you're dry firing, make sure you have a safe dry fire. You got to have a good backstop, folks. Always, always, always have a good backstop. And all other safety rules apply in terms of your muzzle direction and your trigger finger. So if you're not willing to comply by safety rules, I got to say, go watch a different show. But of course, I know you're going to comply with all the safety rules. So let's do this. Let's go ahead and talk some gear. We actually decided here at Live Fire that we wanted to feature different companies. Now, understand that I'm not necessarily giving my specific stamp of approval on this or that product. What we want to do is say, hey, welcome company. What do you have going on? What's your new stuff? What's your most popular item right now? What are you developing in the future? It's kind of like if you were at a major trade show and you got to walk right up to that booth that has some of the coolest gear you've seen and say, hey, tell me about your stuff. What do you have that's awesome? So we have, of course, Blue Force Gear as our featured company today. And I have Chris Seeklander, who's going to join me and talk all about their awesome products. And then I'm going to bring Mr. Tim Herron on the show. And welcome to the show, Chris. How are you today, man?
I'm doing great, Mike. I really appreciate you having me on.
Tell us a little bit about Blue Force Gear. Tell us about your background and then about the company. And then I know you have some pretty cool products, some things you wanted to feature and talk about. By the way, feel free to hold them up in front of a camera and give the brief and all, and they're going to give you the full screen view. So tell us about what you have.
Roger that. Thank you, man. Again, I appreciate you letting me come on and talk about myself and Blue Force Gear. So my name's Chris Seeklander. I'm the Director of Education and Training for Blue Force Gear. I do a lot of product education for our government clients and also commercial clients when I get the chance, and I really do love doing that. Blue Force Gear is out of Savannah, Georgia, and we are a design company that also produces some of what we design for the commercial market. Predominantly, we make stuff directly towards, very tight requirements, which for our customer base is awesome. And sometimes, if I'm being the honest broker with you, Mike, we kind of do a poor job of getting that information out into the real world, if I can put it bluntly. So again, appreciate the opportunity. Doing this here kind of helps us out with that problem set. So, we're universally probably known for Blue Force Gear slings. They are the sling of the Marine Corps, and most recently, we're proud to announce they also just got picked up by the United States Army as authorized attachments to the M4A1. So pretty excited about that. Additionally, Blue Force Gear makes a lot of med kits, a lot of different med kits for a whole lot of different reasons. They're all different shapes and sizes and things like that for kind of very specific problem sets that you're trying to solve with med kits. Very recently, as of SHOT Show this year, we released our grid belt. So we did a previous version of this belt called the chalk belt, and that was specifically it's a load rated belt for doing airborne operations. So when you have to snap into helicopters and things like that. And that belt was very successful, with some clientele. And of course, as soon as we started showing it to civilians and some law enforcement guys, they're like, hey, love the belt, but we don't need all the load bearing stuff on it. So we did a non-load bearing version, which is this right here, called the grid belt. What makes this belt special and different from, I believe, that anything currently that's on the market is this is the only tactical, gun belt currently that is, I don't know if you can see that really well, but it is a fully contoured belt. So it's contoured to your hips. And then also, I don't know if the camera can pick it up, it's contoured from top to bottom, which, doesn't sound like much, but it was apparently, I'm not a designer, but from the design side, it was a real, mother bleeper to get it all scaled to curve. So me and you are kind of similar in age, Mike, but you remember that old Bianchi leather gunfighter belt?
I do.
With the white stitching? That is the belt that I wanted, because I wore that operationally for a long time because they're so friggin' comfortable, as opposed to a rigger belt or something like that. It's like, make me a Bianchi leather gunfighter belt that is, nylon and MOLLE capable and things like that. So the belt is an inner outer combo. Same thing on the inner belt. It's fully contoured, matches, the contour of the outer belt. And once you get the whole system put on and together, something that kind of looks about like this, I'm not blessed with like hips. So I always hated loading down my rigger belt and some other belts that were on the market, because you get, that bite going on in your hips when you got a fully loaded, fully sized gun, med kit, a couple of mags, all that stuff. Then belts kind of get uncomfortable. So to be honest with you, I wasn't super stoked when they're like, hey, we're going to do a belt. It's like, I'm not too much of a belt guy. But they knocked it out of the park. And all the feedback that we're getting from our clients' customers is it's the best belt on the market for form factor, comfort, usability, all that good stuff. So we're pretty happy about that.
Yeah, actually, someone recently posted about that in one of your belts on Instagram. I'm not sure who it was. It might have been Scott Jedlinski that has one of those that you sent them. I think you sent them that belt as well. So I know we have a package shipped to the company sometime soon. I can't wait to try it out and test it out. So what else, man? What else do you have to tell us about with this incredible company?
We also recently did a split front chest rig, which is behind me there on that mannequin. And it's kind of interesting. In the last 20, I'll just say 20 years, probably a little bit more than that. But, we've seen the operational requirements, and then those eventually turn into like commercial trends, if I could use that word, of, we started off with racks, and then we went to plate carriers, and then now it's kind of starting to go back towards racks, both for real world, mission requirements and also just popularity in the US, which is great. So spent a lot of time wearing a rack back in the day, had some ideas on how to improve them. And so we have split front chest rack. We do 7.62 and we do 5.56. I would recommend to anybody just to buy the 7.62 model. The inner rack in there is all 10 speed. So it's very low profile, very, very slim. And you get that 10 speed magazine pouch technology that keeps mags where they need to be without the additional bulk and form factor of like, a true mag pouch or a Kydex mag pouch. And the 7.62 mag pouch, or the 7.62 version back there, you can run 5.56 mags in it beautifully. But because of the extra width, I put my cell phone in there. I put my Kestrel in there when I'm shooting long guns, my laser rangefinder, all that good stuff. And then on the outside of that is two low profile GP pouches that, got 10 speed inside of them, and you can organize them, and they're all great. And then the real cool thing is almost every split front chest rig I ever ran was either all the way open or all the way closed, with like big giant buckles or whatever the case. And I wanted something that when opened would still operate and function like it was closed. So in this one, if you zip it down right there at the bottom, let me see if I've never quite done this. There we go. I could be a weatherman. All right. At the bottom right there is a houndstooth. So you can unzip it, keep the houndstooth connected with a bungee, and then it opens up and vents all that heat. It's super comfortable, but you can still run it. All your mags are in the same spot. All your tools are in the same spot as if it was closed. And like I said, we're here in Savannah, and beta testing that thing all last summer. That was a huge benefit to dump all that heat out of the front of it, because that's kind of the biggest negative about chest racks that aren't split front is they just keep getting hot and keep getting hot and keep getting hot, where it's stuck to you. So fantastic product, the split front chest rig with the 2 low pro GP pouches on it.
Very cool, man. So, I actually spent a little bit of time on your website pre-show trying to look through the gear. And to be honest with you, I had no idea the amount of stuff you made. Even though we had a pre-show talk, I was on the website today and I was pretty amazed. So tell folks where they can learn more about your guys' social channel, if you're on Instagram, whatever else, website that they can go check out the gear and check out some of these new products that you've talked about, or anything else you want to talk about in the near future.
Hey, thank you, man. Yeah, we're at www.blueforcegear.com is our website. We're also Blue Force Gear is on Instagram. I think it's Blue Force Gear. I'm sitting right now in my shoot house, so I have a UTM only shoot house facility. This is kind of my classroom space you're looking at. Back there's the actual shoot house. So this is a joint training facility at Blue Force Gear that we use for, product testing and servicing our Gov clients with education and things like that. So I have my own Instagram page for this place, and it's JTF _ BFG. I'm also excited about this summer, starting in probably July through December. I'll start advertising open enrollment courses here. So I'm pretty excited about that. I love open enrollment courses and working with great Americans, doing great things. And unfortunately, up until this point, I just haven't had time to do it and get the website up and running for registration and all those things. So pretty excited on the latter part of 2023 to start running open enrollment courses here.
Well, thanks, man. Thank you for telling us about some of the gear and some of the things you have upcoming in the future, folks. Make sure you give that website a check out. I'm telling you, when you get on, you're going to be amazed at the amount of stuff that Blue Force offers. So great products, great company. American made, which is the kind of company we love to support. So thanks again, Chris. Have a great day.
Absolutely, man. Thanks again.
All right, folks, let's go ahead and welcome Tim Herron to the show. Tim is one of my alumni, one of my competitors, and all around great guy. He's been teaching since 2014. Tim, what did I overlook on your bio? Tell us a little bit about Tim Herron.
Oh, gosh. Well, I began shooting actually in like 2010. I very quickly found USPSA, and then found a lot of struggles and and kind of those glass ceilings for a lot, in plateaus. And that's when I sought you out as like my very first like formal education back in like 2012. And now I've taken, I think, a couple, 2 or 3 classes from you over the years. And yeah, you've been, I don't know, I'm just honored to be here. You've been one of my biggest mentors and influences in my shooting. And I'm just happy to get to call you a friend. So,
well, of course, man. And welcome to the show. And I'm so happy to have you here. So your first class, if I remember correctly, was at the U.S. Shooting Academy. It was we did a competition handgun series, a 2-day program. Then we had an advanced program or whatever else. You were in that class, correct?
Yep.
Yeah, man, it's funny. I have certainly have hundreds, if not thousands of alumni now, but you stood out to me because in that class, you were so curious about everything. There are a lot of students that show up to class that are ready and willing to learn, but there are not a lot of students that have key questions that really stand out, and you did. And that, of course, your curiosity is what drove you to that class.
It did.
And that's driven you to the next level, man? Now we're peers. We shoot on the Super Squad together. I know you predominantly compete in single stack, although I've seen some video of you doing maybe some carry optic stuff recently. So tell folks just a little bit more about your competitive background, and then we're going to jump into transitions, which I want to talk to you about transitions and what you've learned about that process as well.
Awesome. So yeah, I started competing, kind of at a really kind of high serious level in about 2014, I believe, or 2015, I think was the first year I kind of got to be back in the old single stack days when the single stack nationals was at Paso Park. There was like a Super Squad A and a Super Squad B, and I was very fortunate to kind of make my way up the Super Squad B group, and then kind of qualify my way into getting to shoot with with the likes of you and Phil Strader and Todd Jarrett and our good friend and Rob Latham and things like that, which was a lot of fun. I'm very honored. I never would have thought 8 years prior that I would be getting to shoot with my superheroes. But yeah, I've been predominantly a 1911 single stack shooter kind of since I started shooting. I've been dabbling quite a bit in carry optics, and then now we've got the new limited optics division that USPSA came out with. And of course, that for me is like, oh my gosh, that's the best of both worlds. I get red dots on pistols, but I also get to shoot guns that I truly feel most passionate about, which are 1911 and 2011. So, and very, very fortunate. I think officially I'm the first Grandmaster ranked shooter in the new limited optics division now, as it just began.
Wow. Yeah, well, congratulations, man. I actually haven't even shot that division. I need to have some guns built or whatever else. So speaking of guns, you are actually are you part of Nighthawk Custom? Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep. I was very gracious and honored that they contacted me in 2019 and asked if I would accept a position to represent Nighthawk Custom, and I get to shoot alongside other great, especially IDPA shooters like Matt Sims, who's been with Nighthawk, I want to say since like 2008 or 9. I mean, he's been around the block for a long time, and get to represent a wonderful company. So I'm very honored to get to call them a family. So.
Well, very cool, man. Let's jump into today's subject, because I know there are a lot of viewers that are like, "Hey, get into transitions," and to set the kind of the context of what a transition is, folks. When you're, they're applicable to an extent for the defender, the tactical shooter, or whatever else. But when we're talking about a transition, Tim and I both know that your ability to drive the gun to the next target and then fire that shot as quickly as possible is a huge potential gain in speed. I mean, think about it, Tim. There are only three things we can do faster. We can learn to shoot the gun faster, grip, trigger, sights, that fundamental platform, we call it structure in the bigger circle class.
Correct.
We can learn to move the gun faster and be ready to shoot. And maybe I should also say, leave the target we shot at and be ready to shoot at the next target. And the third is we can move our body faster and be ready to shoot the next position. We're talking about the middle one, the transition. So give the audience your definition of a transition and why it's so important to be good at transitions as a competitive shooter.
Sure. So, I mean, in my classes, I preach the value of transitions as probably the number one place to either gain speed in our shooting or to the number one place with it. We have a degradation of speed in our shooting. So you explained it correctly. That the transition is the time it takes, or what I call the dead time, where we're not shooting, moving the gun from one target, from one target to the next. And everything that we should be trying to do in practical shooting is to minimize dead time so that we can maximize the actual time behind the gun better. We can aim better, we can fire better shots, we can call our shots better, and everything kind of works together to allow us then to minimize the dead time in between. That dead time can be so important to lose, because for every transition that we can, every time that we're moving the gun target to target, that we can eliminate, say, 1 to 2 tenths of a second. Let's say on average in a competitive environment, if you had 10 targets and you could minimize the amount of time between targets by 2 tenths of a second apiece, that ends up adding up to a full 2 seconds of gained time value on a stage, which is, I mean, as you and I both know, I mean, that can be the difference between first place and 25th place on
Yeah.
any given stage. So, I mean, the time made there in transitions is much more crucial in our development than, say, the time behind the gun trying to increase our shot split time. The shot split time, there's give and takes there. Like we have to give up a little bit of structure or grip or give up a little bit of visual confirmation in order to press the trigger faster. But where we don't really have to give up anything, there's honestly no risk in moving the gun from one target faster to the next target, as long as we're maintaining control and structure in when we get the gun there to then take the time to aim the gun to fire the shot. But if we can get rid of that dead time or eliminate that or reduce it, then our efficiency like exponentially, gets much larger.
Yeah, and you made an incredibly important point. When we're talking about split time, folks, if you're, by the way, if you're just tuning into this and you're not a competitive shooter, when we reference split time, we're talking about the amount of time between shots. So when we're firing a sequence or series of shots, the less time between those shots, in theory, the better. But an average, good split time might be a 17 or 18 split. There are guys that can do a 0.12 split, potentially, maybe sometimes. And, more likely than not, our average splits on a medium target would be between an 18 and maybe a 22 or 24, depending on the target. But that's a tiny window of time. Now, when we're talking about transitions, and Tim, you made the mention of, potentially if there are 10 targets on the stage and I can gain 2 seconds on that particular stage only by moving the gun faster. And I'm going to have you walk me through that here in a second. If you told me that, I'd be like, Tim, where do I write the check? Just tell me where to write the check, and I'll take that 2-second time, advantage on every single stage.
Sure.
I think that's a very, very valuable point, man.
Yeah.
So you walk me through the process. And by the way, I've got a non-firing CERT demonstration tool. I tend not to try to call these things pistols for those of you that are instructors out there. But it's a pistol mimicking deal made by Next Level Training, our buddy Mike Hughes out in Washington State. Tim, walk me through transitions, the mechanics from the ground up of a transition.
So obviously structure is extremely important, as you have, so graciously taught me over the years. I think of structure a little bit differently than typical shooters or typical instructors, where I don't believe structure necessarily starts so much at the ground and builds itself up. I believe structure starts more at the pistol and how our hands and body interact with the pistol, and gets less, it becomes less of a priority the further away from the gun that we get. So how the hands build on the gun, how the tension in the hands, the wrist, the forearms, the upper body, and the shoulders all allow us to be able to move the pistol from one target to the next. And we're wanting to try to maintain that structure so that we still have that leverage on the gun when it is actually time to fire the gun. What makes a transition important, of course, is that maintenance of structure, but being able to move the eyes first and prioritize the exit from a target as much as we possibly can. So shot calling becomes a really, really big priority, which is understanding and knowing that the moment that the gun fires and the sights or the dot begins to lift and recoil and just begins that sequence, that we're then finished with that shot, it's now time to begin moving that gun from one target to the next target. And so prioritizing the exit off that target all becomes in as soon as the gun begins to lift and recoil, my shot has been fired. If the next shot is on the next target, I need to move my eyes there first and then immediately have the gun kind of, I don't want to say trail, because it kind of involves then people thinking like, well, I'm going to leave the gun here, move my head here, and then slowly move the gun over. I kind of akin it to like driving a car. Yeah. When we drive a car, if you drive down the highway and you're looking right over the hood of the car, everything on the highway comes at you at Mach speed. And it in 50 to 60 miles an hour feels almost out of control. Whereas what we need to do in order to gain control and become more proactive in where we're placing the gun next, it's just like in a car, we need to look out more towards the horizon so that we feed the brain more information much sooner so that it can respond by allowing the hands to make corrections as needed. With the gun, it's the exact same way. When we're transitioning the gun, it's the eyes need to get immediately off the sights, because the shot's been fired. We now have the permission to do so. The moment that my eyes look at the next target, the gun is ever so slightly trailing behind. So the faster I can get my eyes to the target, the faster my hands will actually move the gun to the next target. And then when
So let me dig into that just a little bit, because you said
Sure.
some key things, and we're also going to talk about the eye target relationship. When we're talking about calling the shot, Tim, you're an iron sighted shooter, and you can also expand and maybe talk about your visual focus as well. Like, are you predominantly target focused? Are you predominantly sight focused? Are you somewhere in between? Or maybe it depends. And I think I may understand what you're going to talk about there. But the point is, when you call the shot, you're not calling the lift and the return and waiting and then taking that information, going, okay, thinking about it. Meaning you literally are calling the shot probably the second the sight lifts. And matter of fact, tell me if you agree or disagree with this. I find that I'm actually calling the shot based on the actual firing process, meaning I'm getting visual confirmation, but I already know if the shot was a good shot based on what I'm feeling in my grip. Like, I can feel, did I move the gun? You understand? The visual confirmation is just a for sure go, and that also depends on the target. If it's a tiny target, mini popper out there at 18 or 19 yards, it makes sense for me to have more of a confirmation visually than a very, very close target. So can you expand?
100%. 100%. So, and I explain that to students and clients all the time, that shot calling is, first and foremost, it's about 80 to 90% visual, but there is a kind of a tactile 10 or 15 or 20% of it too, where, like, your aiming process is not done until you have actuated the trigger and the shot is actually firing, but that firing concept or that, that follow through concept of, confirming your shot when the gun lifts and letting the gun return there to then kind of look past and taking an extra sight picture. That extra amount of validation is what wastes time in the transition. So all I want to do is I want to be able to validate and trust that the pistol is communicating to, via sights and feel. The pistol is communicating just the right amount of information I need to, again, give me that permission then to say, okay, I know that shot is good. Now it's time to move the gun over to the next target, aim the gun accordingly, to where I need to on that next target to be ready to begin that process again. I don't want to recover the gun back to the same target if I am done with that target and the shot or both shots on a target have told me such in my shot calling that, hey, those shots were good. No more time needs to be spent on that. It's time to move the gun as quickly as I can to start that over again on the next target.
Yeah, and folks, if you're watching this right now, Tim made a distinction there. He said that the gun is communicating to him by sights and feel. And of course, we can talk and dig into what he means by the sights. But the point there is that's a perfect piece of information, because the gun, we tend to, as shooters, be so visual. Hey, I aim the gun, I focus on the front sight, which is not a correct statement, or whatever else. The reality is the gun is transmitting information to you both via some sort of visual system, whether it's front and rear sight, focal points, or the dot, or whatever else, visually, as well as feel, by sights and feel. That's a critical statement, folks. And if you're listening and watching this right now, write that on a notepad, write that down, because what Tim just said was a gold nugget of information. And by the way, if you're watching right now, if you haven't clicked the share button, I know you're probably watching this on Facebook, do us a favor, click the share button. Or maybe, Tim, the stuff that you're talking about is so secret and awesome and cool, they don't want to share this with their competitors. So tell me, let's dig into sights. Let's go iron sights first, because you and I are predominantly single stack shooters for many, many years.
Mm-hmm.
Tell the audience about what you're looking at and what you're seeing when you're shooting those iron sights.
So I think, like, I pretty much use what I've come to describe as a soft target focus. So I don't really I don't have a hard focus, like visual accommodation or convergence to a particular spot on the target, as much as I have an awareness of the target and where I want to place the sights on a target. My vision is kind of someplace in between the sights and the target. So the target itself is not one, like, It's not 100% crystal clear, but I can tell you, I'd say probably 90% of the time, or 95% of the time, neither are my sights, either the front sight or the rear sight. They are slightly out of focus as I'm kind of just looking through the sights. I don't prioritize front sight over rear sight or rear sight over front sight. The sights themselves are a system that have to work in unison with each other, because these two pieces of the system are both equally important, because that's what ultimately aligns the bore together with the alignment of the target. And they work as a system, just like we would say on a red dot, where the red dot's never going to show up in the glass on an optic sight unless the window itself or the glass or frame of the optic is first aligned to the target. And then we're using the red dot, of course, then to refine that as needed. And so it's kind of the same thing. I'm using the entire rear sight, including the width of the rear sight, height of the rear sight, and then, of course, the little notch in between as kind of that window, just like I would an optic sight. And then the front sight just becomes my frame of reference for how much validation do I need during the aiming in order to get the bore aligned to a more specific spot on the target. But I think for years,
I can't just solve all problems by just focusing on the front sight.
Now,
That's in a book somewhere. Just focus on the front sight and don't jerk the trigger.
And that's the problem. I think, honestly, obviously words mean a lot. And
Yes.
I think the biggest misunderstanding, I think, is for years and years and years, we've used the word focus on the front sight, when honestly, in reality, I think what we should have been teaching students to do is use the word awareness instead. If we focus on the front sight, we tend to focus every molecule of our being on the front sight. The problem is I can focus on the front sight and miss the target just as much as I could not see the front sight at all and miss the target. I think instead what we really need to have is just an awareness of the sight alignment. And when somebody starts to lose that awareness, maybe just reminding them, hey man, be a little bit more aware all the way through the application of the trigger of what the sights are telling you, or where the sights are aligned on the target. And awareness itself would fix a much larger kind of modicum of issues that we see in shooters versus a hard focus on one thing or another. Hard focus to me is like using the word absolute. And as you and I both know, there are zero absolutes in this.
Yeah, and that's a great answer to the question, because we're not saying, folks, if you're watching this right now, that we don't ever focus hard on the front sight, or to an extent on the front sight in relationship to the rear sight, in relationship to the target. We're just saying that and you put it very, very well. A general open awareness is going to give you more information about the alignment of the gun, because ultimately that's what we're trying to figure out. Is the gun aligned enough to hit the shot? And by the way, the gun doesn't have to be aligned perfectly for most shots we shoot in competition. That's
exactly.
Specifically in relation to the transitions, that's where a lot of people lose time. They stay on one target too long waiting for that visual confirmation when they didn't need to, and then they take too much time to realign that handgun via the dot or via the sight on the next target. So Tim, let's go back to transitioning and talk to me about the calling that shot, and then the movement of the gun from the primary target, the target you just shot, to the next target, and what you're doing over there.
So, yeah. And so the movement is very, very important. Like I said, first it's led visually. So I've got to get the eyes to find the next target, so that, again, the brain can connect the correct, neural pathways to get the hands to exactly where the eyes are looking next. Depending on width of the transition or the distance of the two targets apart is going to determine whether or not I'm using, or I'm enveloping a lot more of my core structure, like torso structure or leg structure to move the gun, or if it just becomes more of something like floating the hands in front of the eyes, where I don't need to like overly exert or muscle the gun from one target to the next. So on, let's say, targets that are anywhere between a yard, target width apart, shoulder to shoulder, to about 2 to 3 yards away, what I don't want to do is I don't want to overemphasize like extraneous core energy to move the gun around, because what typically happens is when we try to muscle the gun that hard, we will forget to kind of break the gun or slow the gun in onto the transition, which causes us to overdrive or to underdrive the target. And then we have to make kind of corrections to get the gun in on there, which making every single little correction we make is obviously burning up a tenth of a second more, before we finalize where our aiming point is. On wider transitions, we can't necessarily just use the hands to kind of just arbitrarily swing the gun around. We're really like, if we're really focusing on, like, as you put it, driving the gun from one transition to the next or one target to the next, now I'm going to start to really invoke, kind of lower body core, everything from kind of abs, hips, and legs to really drive my lower body structure to help assist the gun to that next target as quickly as I can. The great thing about using that muscle system as well is it allows me to exit the gun off the target very, very quickly. But then, of course, since my eyes got there slightly ahead of time, just ahead of the gun, then it also then allows my brain to kind of tell my body to slow down just a little bit as the gun is coming onto the target, so that I don't oversteer or understeer the gun into the target, and I can stop the target. I can stop the gun on the target very precisely.
Tim, one of the things that I believe, and I want to see if you agree with this and also kind of show the audience this on camera. When we're talking about looking ahead of the gun, right? I see this all the time on social media. I see a lot of folks that are going to practicing moving their head and driving the gun to it with good intention. They're trying to drive the gun to the spot they're looking, but two things happen there. Is now I've taken the gun relationship, the eye target relationship, and the upper body triangle, that I think you use a similar term, and I've broken that down. So now I have to get the gun back in front of my vision. So if you on camera here, if you look at a true transition, I've got a little corner of a white thing over there, and I'll go to the R on a box that's sitting over there behind the camera. When I move the gun, my eyes do in fact get ahead of the gun, but they're a very close relation. There's a very close relationship of the gun and the eyes. Is that the motion you do when you're transitioning? Anything you do different there?
No, 100%. And I agree with you. I see that's tended to become a trend here that we're seeing, especially like on social media, where, and you're right, it's great intentions. Unfortunately, it falls into creating a habit that will actually slow your transition down, because you're thinking so much about, I have to get the eyes so far ahead, that then we allow the body to linger back on a target. Well, man, you may as well just let the gun cycle back to that target. You went ahead and validated your work down there and said, okay, great, give it a thumbs up, and then go ahead and move the gun again. It's not really focusing on the efficiency as it needs to happen. So I agree with you. So if the gun is in front of my face, right, and I've got that structure completely on, when I'm looking, let's say I've got a kind of a lamp off to my right side here, what I'm going to do is, as soon as the gun begins to lift, now my eyes are looking over here. But as the gun begins to lift and the eyes look, the eyes are picking up the spot. And the moment the eyes take off of the sights, that's my body's cue to say, okay, we're done with this one. We need to follow where Tim's looking next. And the gun is, when I say it's ever so slightly trailing, it's not eyes are over here and then the gun comes over. It's the eyes and the gun kind of move together, but the eyes are, dare I say, 2 to 3 thousandths of a second ahead of the pistol. And that's all it takes. Anything more than that is a waste of time. It's great for I guess kind of helping to show what transitions I guess look like, but that's not what's going to happen in the grand scheme of things when you actually are applying the technique correctly.
Yeah, and folks, if you're watching this right now, a tip, if you're trying to figure out how to practice that sequence, is simply to look at where you want to drive the gun to. So if you're firing a shot over here, for example, then I want you to look where you're going to drive the gun to next. Just look ahead of the gun, but don't leave the gun behind. Look ahead of the gun, but don't leave the gun behind. That could be a t-shirt.
Yes, it could.
Right? So look ahead of the gun. And so please address this in that case. Can you address because we're looking at the target ahead of the gun, and we know we might have to bring the visual focus to an extent toward the sights to verify sight alignment on a harder shot.
Sure.
But what have you experienced and learned about the optic? Because now, and maybe you see the same thing, in any given open enrollment class that I have 60% optics or more in the
almost,
class.
Yeah.
What have you learned on the optic, aiming the optic on a transition, something like the Delta Point Pro versus the iron sights?
So I think the biggest issue that a lot of shooters fall into, one of the biggest traps, right, is if they've spent a lot of time behind an iron sight pistol and they initially go to an optic, and you know it as well as I do, the very number one problem that we have that red dot shooters or new adopters of red dots have is, man, I lost the dot, or I cannot get the dot to find, to show up in the window. And then when they finally get the dot there, they want to trap it with all of their might, both visually and physically. So, and that becomes then a really, really bad habit where then, because they're so afraid of losing it again, that they're afraid to take their eyes out of the optic window. So then everything, their entire universe gets circumvented into this small little ocular cavity that's about, like let's say the delta point, what is it, about 40 millimeters wide by about 35 millimeters tall. And then everything that they see only happens through kind of the windshield of that optic. And they really need to trust and focus more on good structure. As they take their eyes out of the optic window, the good structure will allow the dot to return directly to where their next point of visual processing is at. If we're trusting that the iron sights are going to get there, then we have to trust that the optic is going to be the same way. A lot of shooters also think about the red dot itself is like, I want to have so much visual information that I care what the dot does as it lifts and arcs and lift all the way off the target and all the way back. And I'm telling you right now, you need to learn when to turn off or ignore excess information. The great thing about the dot is the dot gives us a true, validation of all of the information, but sometimes it gives us an overwhelming abundance of information that we really don't need. Like I personally tell students all the time, I don't care what the dot does the absolute moment that it lifts on the target when I break the shot. When people ask me, does it lift the window? Do you see it? Do you lose it out of the window? If I'm transitioning the gun, I lose it every time. Why? Because my eyes are already out of the window and I'm making the window and the optic come to where I want the gun to go next. I couldn't tell you what the dot does in recoil.
Right. It doesn't matter what it does. What matters is what it does on the next target. And you may, once again, folks, if you're listening, get your notepad, write this down. The distinctions that Tim is making here are critical because he's talking about the fact that structure itself is what's going to really, truly allow you to find the dot. He also said earlier in the show that using the window or the actual, the frame and the window and the glass of the optic to get it on target in a standard presentation with a good structure is going to put the dot where it needs to be versus trying to find the dot. And I'll give you something interesting, Tim, to weigh in on. I had a student recently in the class, a class that very similar to what you took, and we did an X pattern kind of drill on steel, and he could not pick up his pace, and he realized that instead of just looking at the steel and driving the dot to the next target, he was trying to look back at the outer frame or the glass of the optic, which, as an iron-sighted shooter, maybe you had to fight that, but your vision has always been, hey, I need to come back and get some sort of confirmation on the optics, where you said it best, build a good structure and drive the gun to where your eyes are, and the dot's going to be there 99% of the time, right?
Yep. Yes, sir. So in iron sights are the same way. We use that same kind of, like kind of pedagogy, so to speak, with iron sights a lot. We're so focused on focusing on the front sight that a lot of times, even in the midst of a transition, we take our eyes off of the front sight and we try to take all of the information only from the front sight without any relationship to the rear sight of a gun on an iron sight gun. And people will tell me all the time, and you'll see them overdrive the target, and you'll ask them, hey, what did you see? Man, I don't know why I missed 6 inches to the right or to the left of that target. My front sight was there. The question I always have them is, okay, great, your front sight was there, but where was your rear sight? You weren't done. You weren't done because your actual structure wasn't finalized on the target yet. So the rear sight is the most, and just like your optic window with a red dot, the optic window or the rear sight is the most important to get to the target first and anchor that part of the gun to the target first, because it's what's most connected to your hands. If it gets there first, guess what has to? It has no, it doesn't have an argument in this battle at all. The front sight, which also the emitter of the optic, which is basically the dot in there, follows what the muzzle's going to do. It has no choice in the matter but to follow wherever your hands or the rear sight is anchored to on the target anyway. So I tell people all the time, if you're looking for the dot to be there, but you're trying to get the dot there or trying to get the front sight there first without getting the optic window or without getting the rear sight there first, you're going to lose out on that battle every single time.
Yeah, because you've broken down on the alignment, right?
100%.
Yeah, I love that, man. I love that, and I love your question to your students is like, their answer is, well, the front sight was there. Well, then your question is, well, where was the rear sight? That's critical, man, because I think people forget that. They've heard that, and we've said that, and maybe, a previous or my generation of instructors said, focus on the front sight, because we understand the importance of understanding what the front sight does, but we really messed that statement up. It should have been focus on your front sight and its relationship with the rear sight on the target. That's the statement. It should have been that, but we shortened that up a little bit. We probably
right.
Shouldn't have done that. So.
And then when you move the gun from one target to the next, and then I didn't mean to cut you off there, but the thing that stands out to me the most, and is taking the time when you get the gun to the next target, and like I've broken it down, I've scienced the heck out of this. The difference between an unaimed shot where you took the time actually to just drive the gun to the target without any finalization of aiming versus just refining the sights enough to ensure the shot is going to be where you want to. The difference is literally less than 1/10 of a second to either aim or unaim the gun in just the physicalities of getting the gun there. So, and it was something that stood out to me for years that you told me years ago. That was, if you're already taking the time to point the gun at the target, then you've already taken the time needed to then adequately aim the gun. So guess what? Adequately aim the gun the way you need to, and don't let yourself rush that particular process. That was also then reiterated to me over our time together back in November when I got to, very graciously get to attend yours and Rob's class, when Robbie, kind of tapped me on the shoulder and was like, you're transitioning wrong. And I was like, how dare you? I've been such a great transitioning, instructor and coach for years. And Rob said, yeah, but are you tired of missing that wide steel? He goes, I want you to listen to me, and I want you to do exactly what I tell you. I want you to aim. And then he was very silent for a few seconds. He goes, then shoot and leave. And I was like, right, aim, shoot, leave. And he goes, no, I want you to aim. And then he was silent again. He goes, then shoot and leave. And I was like, okay, aim, then shoot and leave. And he goes, you got it. That's it. And then when I immediately started to apply that, it made 100% sense to me, which meant I can race the gun or prioritize the exit because there's no risk involved. Once the shot is fired, getting the gun exited off the target in that transition is the most critical, hyper, go fast portion of it. But what I don't want to do when I get the gun to the next target is just sling the gun to the target and rapidly press the trigger without first aiming to ensure that the time that I took to put the gun there is not wasted with a bad shot.
Yeah, and aiming, folks, if you're listening, you hear that term. Aiming is the process of both creating and verifying some of the alignment of the gun. And aiming can change from a 2-yard target to a 22-yard target. They're not the same thing. So don't try to do the same thing on a 2-yard target or a 22-yard target. So, Tim, tell us some of your favorite drills to work your transitions. How do you work that in practice?
I got lots. So, I don't say really lots. I mean, there's lots of ways to work transitions, but two of my favorites, of course, a good mutual friend of yours and I's, Blake Miguez, who is known for having exceptional transitional speed, but the Blake drill, which is basically kind of like a vice pres, 3 targets, about a target width. I will now vary the distances between those targets and kind of work on, making sure that I'm stopping the gun target to target. It's very kind of low round count. It's 6 rounds. It could be 6 shots per string. It could even be just 1 shot per string, and just focusing on stopping the gun adequately each target. Your X drill is one of my all-time favorites too. The great thing about the X drill is you only need 2 targets. So set up at your range becomes very, very simple. And that's important when we're trying to set good practice habits. But 2 targets, 7 yards apart, 10 yards apart, you can make them any distance that you would like. The great thing about the X drill is that you could shoot that so many different sequences, which allows you then to also work on your visual control or throttle control itself. How much visual acuity or how much confirmation do you need on a 7-yard body shot versus how much confirmation, sight confirmation do you need on a 7-yard or 10-yard head box, shot? And then what do you hold yourself to? Is it anywhere on a 6x6 head box okay? Or are you really striving for that 2-inch by 4-inch A zone on like a USPSA target, or that 4-inch down zero on an IDPA target? So there's lots of ways that you can play with that. And I really like the sequencing, like you introduced me to, which was different than how
Yep.
when we first trained together back in 2012, how you're doing it now versus then. It was really cool to see, because you would change the sequence and have us shooting it all sorts of different ways, maybe body, then head, then back to a body, and changing. So it was really refreshing, and it keeps that particular drill from becoming very, very mundane and boring and monotonous, which is good too.
Yeah, folks, if you're listening and watching right now, that the extra, we set up a pattern of targets at whatever width, and then you can work on both the body and the headshot, and you could actually draw. Sometimes I'll take the extra and I'll draw a small box in the bottom of the target. So you're transitioning maybe from a wide open body shot to a teeny tiny box up to the head box or whatever else. And like Tim said, you could vary the pattern, literally unlimited, the patterns of transitions you can work. And one more question, Tim, and then we'll talk a little bit about where people can find you and stuff.
Sure.
When you're working your transitions, and I completely agree, from a structure perspective, the most important part of the structure is at the handgun, and then it gets less important down to the ground. Although, please, folks, don't misunderstand us. We're not saying that the structure and your attachment to the ground is unimportant. It's just less important than the structure in the upper body with the hands and the arms. But I find myself working more transitions in a compromised position, off
Yes.
balance, because we do that all of the time in matches. So you don't always want to be set up in a perfect structure. Do you agree with that?
100%. So, and you've done a wonderful time, a wonderful job over the years, like being able to really reinforce that to your students as well. Like when you work like the VTAC barrier, and you'll work from the left side to the right side, kneeling. So that the one thing that maintains like solidity is your upper body structure on the gun, because that's what allows the gun to point. Just because the structure is I'm not compromising the upper body structure. Even if I turn the gun on its side, I'm still able to aim the gun very, very well and shoot very, very accurate shots. But then the lower body structure, especially belt line and below, completely changes all the time based on the needs. If it's a low port, I'm going to have to squat more. If I have to drop down to shoot kneeling prone or completely prone, the one thing that doesn't need to change, or that I'm trying to eliminate change from, is in how the handgun is built to my hands all the way through my arms to my shoulders. Like I said, it becomes a little less. And again, you're right. It's not that it's unimportant, but it becomes less important, so to speak, because shooting on the move, what is moving all the time? Your lower body structure, leaning really, really hard on things. And you're obviously, I'm known for being a very, very small stature person. So a lean for somebody that might be just a slight lean might have me basically being up on one foot on a really, really hard lean. You can't tell me then, well, your lower body is so important. Man, I've made some really critical shots, even at 20, 30-yard targets, where I feel like the only confirmation I've got with the ground is like by the toes grasping at the straws of grass in my feet. So, I mean, you're right. Like, don't misunderstand us as saying it's not important, but changing those things and working around those things really, really helps to build really good transitional habits as well.
Cool. Well, Tim, you have brought it in this show. You've actually said some things that are making me think and get to work back on the range this week. And we literally go way back. You're one of my alumni, and I'm super proud of what you've done. I'm super proud of how you were relaying information. Certainly it's not exactly what I teach, which is exactly what you should be doing. You should have taken some of the things you learned from me or whoever else and evolved and added your own flavor. And you are doing a fantastic job, man. I can't tell you how proud I am of you. It's one of my alumni, so
Yes,
I just
sir.
want to put that out there.
And I tell
you're
people all the time.
I'm-
I tell people all the time. I mean, I'm big, huge on give credit where credit is due. And I think a lot of my students are like, oh my God, if you mention Mike's name or Rob's name, or, the people that have been an immense influence on me. But I tell people all the time, and they're like, God, Mike Seeklander, you mention that guy all the time. I'm like, you have no idea, the amount of influence that man has had on me, not only as an instructor to a student, but also then as a peer instructor to instructor or competitor to a competitor. And it means the world to me. So I'm very honored that and very humbled at the opportunity to get to come to your channel here and to be a part of this. So thank you so much for having me.
Well, and thank you for your kind words. And folks, if you're watching right now and you don't know who Tim Herron is, you need to. If you're looking for a good class to take, my personal stamp of approval, and I don't give that out lightly, by the way, folks. Tim Herron, 100%. Tim, tell them where they can find you on social media. Tell them about your website. Tell them about any future classes coming up you might have slots in, or you might want to see some folks in. Give them
so, I mean, the best way to find me is Tim Herron Shooting. So it's TimHerron shooting.com. That's my website. I've got a YouTube channel where I try to give a lot of, kind of free milk, to the masses as well. And the YouTube channel is also Tim Herron Shooting. My Instagram page is Tim Herron Shooting. You can see the the similarities there. I keep it simple. But then also, on Facebook, I'm on everything just about, but like Twitter. But so Facebook, Instagram, all of the social media outlets. My schedule can be found on timherronshooting.com/schedule. Every class that is available, if there's a registration link, you can click on the link and be able to register. I think this year I've got 45 different open enrollment classes all over the country. And I'm looking to fill every single one. So far, I've taught 15 so classes, I think, since about the second week of January up till now. And it's been good. Got a couple that are a little slow to fill, but I think we're all kind of experiencing that right now. But it's been a great year, and I'm looking forward to being an even better year. So
cool. Well, folks, get on Tim's website, check it out, give him a follow on Instagram and on social as well. Trust me, he puts lots of great stuff out. He will post tips on his practice and show you some of his drills. So I follow him and watch him on a regular basis. Once again, my personal stamp of approval. Great guy, great instructor, and also, maybe most importantly, someone that struggled and learned and paid his way and worked his way up. So he is someone that, as a potential student, will be able to see things and analyze things and teach you things that maybe some guy that's a pure natural might not know, because it was easy for them. It wasn't easy for me. It wasn't easy for Tim, and I highly recommend you take one of his classes. Tim, thank you so much for coming on the show, man. You knocked it out of the park. Transitions. Outstanding material. Thank you, brother. Have a great day now. And folks, thank you for watching this episode of Livefire. Of course, if you are on the Livefire app, if you're not on the Livefire app, give it a try, give it a check out. And if you are on, give me a follow, send me a message. I'll follow you back. If you need help with the drills or have a question, please just message me and let me know. That's what I'm here for. So hopefully you learned a thing or two from this episode, and of course, look forward to a future episode on Fridays. And if you have something you want us to cover, or maybe a guest you'd love to see on the show, let us know. Drop us an email or a message. Thanks. Stay safe, folks. And until then, very much.